So it's about 10 o'clock. We'll see if other people file in, but thank you for being here this morning. If you woke up early or if you stayed up the entire night, I hope either way you're feeling okay. Anybody here, it's their first MAGFest? Well, welcome. Just a poll, how many Gen X people are here? Millennials. Thought so. Most of y'all. Gen Z? Alrighty. I don't think any Gen Alphas. Okay. I'm just asking because kind of like the heyday of this was within like probably millennials and Gen Z. But if you're outside of those demographics, I hope that, you learn a little something about what we were playing back then, what actual software you were buying for your kids at the time. But just a quick introduction, my name is Amy. I've been coming to MAGFest for a couple years. I just really enjoyed deep dives into weird topics. But the impetus for this one is just thinking about different games we played over the years. And whenever I talk to people about edutainment games, it's almost always a very enthusiastic, like, oh my God, response. So like, for example, I asked my D&D group, which is in my millennial cohort, about their experience with edutainment games, and they very enthusiastically replied with things like JumpStart, Carmen Sandiego, Zoombinis, things like that. The first edutainment game that I remember playing was Oregon Trail on a green screen Apple II computer in 2nd and 3rd grade in a learning cottage, or a trailer, because that was where the 3rd grade was at the time. And then, my sisters and I played on our family computer a lot. So for a while, those were some of the few games we could convince our parents to buy us, because there was still kind of this worry about like, oh, your grades are gonna drop or you're gonna spend so much time on stuff, and like we just did that with the edutainment games anyways. But we learned something, going to the local media play or the mall to go get you a nice piece of software. And it's fun to see how people experience different subsets of edutainment games. There's a whole lot out there. Some were more widespread than others, access varied. But a lot were available at schools, libraries, public spaces, or just a friend's house. So, quick treat, that's like me sometime I think in elementary school with the family cat playing some kind of, probably an edutainment game on our old family computer. So quick lowdown of the scope of this panel. There's no way to cover everything. I apologize in advance if there's something you were thinking about that I do not cover. The whole there was no bottom to the hole, it was turtles all the way down. But I'll cover some of the big entities and franchises, primarily talk about computer or PC games designed for kids, although adult edutainment games do exist. And focus mostly on the 1980s to 2000s timeframe, which is like the heyday of the CD-ROM, because very much the story of like the heyday of edutainment games is very much the story of coincides very well with the story of personal computing and the proliferation of the CD-ROM as a piece of media. So I hope you learned something new as well as remember something you enjoyed way back when. So first of all, what counts as edutainment? This can be flexible depending on if you're trying to convince your parents to buy you something. But a good definition I found was intentional merging of video games and educational software into a single product. So it's something where education is a primary core purpose, and if you take that out, then it's really missing something. Like, something I was thinking about was the humongous entertainment games, but those are more akin to like Maniac Mansion and other like puzzle games, which definitely have their problem-solving value, but like they're not kind of shoehorned into curricula that you would see in school. And then classification, I found 2 different classifications, like designed around drilling subject matter in a linear way. That's your math, your language arts, grammar, sometimes typing, or aimed to encourage creative thinking and problem solving. And that one, I think you had a little more flexibility on what you could get away with. So yeah, when I was putting this together, I was thinking, is it learning, problem solving, critical thinking? Is it something that like plausibly your school system could buy for you to have it in your library, something like that? So let's take a look at the quick history of where it all began and the history of personal computing. So this is the first edutainment game. This is the Sumerian game from 1964. It's an early text-based strategy video game of land and resource management developed as part of a joint research project between the Board of Cooperative Educational Services of Westchester County, New York, and IBM for the investigation of the use of computer-based simulations in schools. So this was when, in the 60s, for these towns and cities that had big computing corporations as like the big company town, they were starting to work with the local school systems. So it was designed by a woman named Mabel Addis, who's pictured. She was a fourth grade teacher at the time and programmed it with William McKay for the IBM 7090 time-shared mainframe computer. So you had to get a timeshare, like students had to get timeshares to use a teletype machine to basically converse with this giant mainframe computer that IBM had. So the Sumerian game has been described as the first video game with a narrative as well as first edutainment game. As a result, Mabel Addis has been called the first female video game designer and the first writer of a video game, which is pretty cool. Later, they added some graphical renditions. It's not necessarily the first version or the last. The original code for the game is lost, but the projector slides and 3 printouts of the individual game sessions were found in 2012, and those were donated to the Strong National Museum of Play, which is in Rochester, New York, and that's a great museum. They have it in the Video Game Hall of Fame. And a recreation of it is actually available to play on Steam if you're very curious. So talking about the why and how of edutainment games, exploring applications of new technology. Something new comes out in the computing world. A lot of people in education try and figure out, can we use this to engage our students? So yeah, just when something new comes along, what all can you do with it? The video game crash in 1983 also is part of the story. Home computing was growing while arcades were shrinking. So computing was moving into the home, especially with the rise of personal computers with more things to do on personal computers and continuous lowering of cost where more people could have a computer in their home. So developers looked to make games in new markets as arcade space shrank and reached new audiences, which is also those new markets as well as kind of a PR thing with the moral panic and backlash of video games. How do you entertain kids but appease the adults who buy those games for them? Kids are the users, but the adults are the buyers. You have to convince the public that video games do not promote violence nor foster addiction and can have an educational value. Kind of like a technological determinism pushback for this. Yeah, and then what I touched on, accessibility, whether that is ease of use or access, like physical access if you can reach the thing. So computers became more user-friendly, using a keyboard instead of punch cards. You didn't have to use a teletype machine. You started seeing user interfaces. Low-level computer language could be translated to human language more easily, so like you didn't have to speak computer code in order to engage with them. Yeah, and then physically accessible, more schools and libraries were getting computers. Some people were buying the family computer in the home. Usually you'd have like one for everybody in a household. Yeah, and then early on, some school systems did have those timeshares where you're tapping into a big mainframe and you essentially buy bandwidth to use that big computer. And yeah, personal computers made computers small enough to fit in public spaces instead of having it the size of a bus, and generally more affordable. And this kind of coincides with the evolving models of human-computer relationships, which is something I'm interested in. Kind of the story of computing, one-to-many computing, that's where you have that big bus-sized computer and many people are using the one thing. Usually those were in research labs, universities, companies, and then if you were a layperson, the way you would access it would probably be through a school timeshare system. And then we got to more one-to-one computing. That's sitting at the personal computer. One person is using one computer at a time. So that's kids in a classroom, in a computer lab using each of the computers, or you in your home using it on the family computer. So you have a smaller pool of users who interact with it, and that gives you more time and a little bit more intimacy to do a little bit more. And then now we're kind of in this many-to-one computing phase where, you are essentially the uniting factor or the nexus of a whole bunch of your devices that may or may not be connected to each other. An ecosystem of computing devices where you as one person can wield a bunch of devices at once. So the evolution of that is really interesting and something I hadn't thought about before this panel. Now let's talk about the coincided. Some of the major groups involved in the edutainment space, and some of these you may recognize, and some of them you may not realize did certain things.
Computers were so big they could take up entire buildings. Schools connected to these mega computers by telephone lines through a process called time sharing, and students learned on teletypewriters.
And all of a sudden we have this thing called MEC, which was funded by the state legislature at $3 million.
MEC, also known as the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, helped schools gain access to megacomputers, and Dale was at the forefront. Then he got word that two men known as the Steves had developed microcomputers that could help spread MEC's educational tools a lot faster. Their names, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
They had nothing going. They were selling their computers at the street, on the street fair. So we did a lot of time with Steve and Steve. We had a lot of time with all the people who ran Apple and made Apple great.
Part of Apple's long road to greatness leads back to the Oregon Trail. When the two companies partnered, Apple computers ended up in Minnesota schools, and MEC's games were on their screens.
Oh, for sure.
A history teacher named Don Rowage and his friends invented Oregon Trail, and when he went to work for MEC, Dale helped push the wagon forward.
Did you guys have...
Notice the pronunciation of wagon, definitely a Minnesotan. And then down in the bottom right corner, that is some of that punch tape that was used in the big computers. So initially you had punch cards, which you had to interchange, and then punch tape, which let you do a long CVS receipt of a program. And then really the movable media with floppy disks is really what helped. As well as I said, like Apple made a big push to bring personal computers to different places and get those markets. And like, odds are if you played an edutainment game like Oregon Trail, it was on an Apple II. So yeah, let's talk about MEC, or the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. This does not start off as a company. It's an organization that was through the Minnesota state government and public school system, with the goal to provide computer services to schools across Minnesota. But their games became so popular that they were like, well, shoot, this is beyond the scope of Minnesota at this point. So Minnesota, I didn't know, was a tech hub in the 60s. You had IBM, you had Honeywell, you had a bunch of these other computing companies that were there and were present. And then you noticed in the video before there was some General Mills stuff. Like General Mills had a mainframe computer that they did allow some of the schools to timeshare with. So a group of teachers from the University of Minnesota's College of Education wanted to introduce computers to classrooms via teleprinters and timesharing, kind of like with the Sumerian game. In '68, Dale, the friends, and other visionary leaders in Minnesota set up TIES, which is Total Information for Education System. That's the precursor to MEC, a computer network linking Minneapolis area suburban schools with mainframe computers via modems, telephone lines. In the 70s, the state chartered MEC, which is this consortium to advance that initiative. And within 4 years, 96% of Minnesota children had access to computers in 1973. It was the highest rate in the world. It was nuts. So student teachers developed Oregon Trail, which was available via the MEC computing system. The first version was on teletype, so kind of like what you saw with the game before. But then subsequent versions popped up on those Apple IIs, as they were talked about before, and that was really the big boom and proliferation of these games. And then later released on other platforms with advancing technology and the movement from personal computers, movement to personal computers away from mainframe computing. They did other edutainment games like the Trail series, like I remember playing Yukon Trail, the Munchers series like Number Munchers, Math Munchers, Odell Lake and Odell Down Under. We had a copy of Odell Down Under that we put a lot of hours in, and some of that fear of survival is burned into my mind. So it worked. But being funded by the state government, they needed more capital to grow than the state legislature would provide, and it didn't seem reasonable to have just one state foot the bill for a national initiative. So MEC was spun off into a private company in 91. And then it was acquired by Softkey in 95 and continued to publish more games. Like, we had a newer version of the Number Munchers game, it was Word Munchers Deluxe. And then Softkey became the Learning Company, which we'll talk about later, and that was acquired by Mattel, who closed MEC in 1999. So MEC was one of the first, but it started to kind of peter out at about the same time a lot of these did. Oregon Trail is also in the World Video Game Hall of Fame at the Strong Museum. And you can play it on a Macintosh in the History Museum right around the corner. So that version of it on, this is a Macintosh SE, not an Apple II, but if you have time today, if you want to putz around with it, you can.
Where is Carmen Sandiego? Carmen Sandiego.
Nicolas Cage has nothing on Carmen Sandiego.
Tell me where is Carmen Sandiego? Carmen Sandiego. Where on earth can she be? Where on earth can she be? Timbuktu, can you help us by the phone? Where is Carmen Sandiego?
Yeah, this game was made in the 90s. You can tell from that shot from New York. So let's talk about Broderbund. So this was started in 1980 by two brothers and a sister who joined later. Their first game was Galactic Empire for the Apple II. The Apple II is making its way all these different places. People are starting to develop stuff for it because they can get their own computer to develop stuff on, and other people can play it. So Galactic Empire had a bunch of names taken from African languages. A group of merchants was named Broderbund, which is Afrikaans for Association of Brothers, to emphasize its family origin while avoiding a connection with the ethno-nationalist Afrikaner organization of the same name. The Carlsons altered the spelling, were naming their company Broderbund, kind of with the slash. Gary Carlston has been recorded saying, "If we had known we were going to be successful, we would not have chosen that name, and we endured a fair bit of criticism because of the South African connection." So I did not know that about this initially. I always wondered where the name came from. And the company's original intention was to market software for law offices with games as a side business, because one of the brothers was a lawyer. These guys also developed Karateka and the original Prince of Persia game using rotoscoping, also in the Hall of Fame. And then Myst, which was the best-selling PC game for a decade, which was helped with the widespread adoption of the CD-ROM. Carmen Sandiego and Logical Journey of the Zumbinis were a popular edutainment game series. They also did the Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing series. So this one is for adults to learn typing. There was also a kids version. And they were also acquired by Softkey in the late 90s, which then folded into the Learning Company. You kind of get this gradual monopolization of everybody. But I wanted to give an extra slide to Carmen because that's the one I think a lot of people see the most. So I have a question for you. Where in the world is? Thank you. I wanted to check if you're awake. So these are some of the highlights. These are not all of the games. This was a rabbit hole. There are some interesting entries in the series. The latest release was Where on Google Earth is Carmen Sandiego, based on the animated series of like the rehash that came out. So the name Carmen Sandiego. The original developer at the studio, David Siefkin, got the name by combining names of Brazilian singer and actress Carmen Miranda in the city of San Diego, California. However, he departed the project shortly after writing the first script to become a foreign service officer in the U.S. State Department and served as a press and cultural attaché. So that might speak to why Carmen is the agent that she is and Acme chasing her. There might have been some consultation with that. So the first several games follow the same formula. You learned about geography or another subject, track down the master thief Carmen and her band of vile criminals with the help of Acme. These were later remade and expanded upon as we moved from floppies to CD-ROMs. One that I learned about at MAGFest a couple years ago was where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego? The Video Game History Foundation has a good article on this because they were the ones who brought it to my attention, and I have them in my sources at the end of this. But the Minot public school system noticed the popularity of the Carmen games among students, and an 8th grade teacher proposed the idea of, well, why don't we just ask? The worst they could say is no. And they convinced them to make it. Like they got public school funding to make this thing for like the state centennial or something like that. I also like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego's Luggage? This is a Carmen Sandiego game that was based on the game shows and video games and was part of a classroom-based customer service training course at Scandinavian Airways Systems. Games and learning writes, the corporate sector embraced game-based learning early on with games like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego's Luggage? The date of this release is unknown. I desperately wanted to know more about this. And then with Carmen, you also get the game show that was hosted by Greg Lee and Lynn Thigpen and the a cappella group Rockapella. That aired on PBS and was filmed in New York City. 295 episodes over 5 seasons. It won 7 Daytime Emmys and a 92 Peabody Award. The show was created partially in response to the results of a National Geographic survey indicating little knowledge of geography among some of the American populace, with 1 in 4 being unable to locate the Soviet Union at the time or the Pacific Ocean. The show's questions were verified by National Geographic World, who also provided the prizes for the contestants in the form of magazine subscriptions. And then there were Carmen Sandiego Days, which were events started in the 80s, which was a week-long Carmen-themed event hosted by schools in conjunction with Broderbund and Learning Company, and the 30th one took place in 2018. I don't know if this is still going on, but the fact that they had 30 of them is cool. Yeah, and then Broderbund is recognized in the World Video Game Hall of Fame and the Strong Museum, which has a copy of the first game that you see there. I took that picture when we went there. And they had a French copy that was later made, which I thought was fun.
But prepare for hyperspeed. I wonder what could be wrong.
Well, did you check the fuel gauge? Because you probably ran out of fuel again, and if
I've got it. It must be the polytronic combustion regulator. Spot, prepare to beam out for repairs.
To me? Nah, I'm not gonna get hit by a meteor.
I'll be below deck if you need me.
Yeah, wake. You make me do all the work around here.
It's 10 a.m. Do you know where your robot is?
Wow! Spot?
The music for the Math Blaster games are insane, whoever composed them. So let's talk about Davidson a little bit. Who remembers any of the Math Blasters games? Nice. Davidson was founded by husband and wife duo Bob and Jan Davidson, who lived in California at the time in 1983. The first one was Math Blaster in 1983 on the Apple II and Atari 8-bit computers. I don't have an image of it here, but it looks like your standard Atari game. You didn't start getting actual Blastonaut until later in like 1987. So 1993's Math Blaster Episode 1, In Search of Spot, we saw the cutscene there. That introduced narrative elements like the cutscenes you saw, animation, voice acting, and then the characters were redesigned in the second half of the 90s. You can kind of see the progression here. Yeah, they made a slew of games and remakes of previous games calibrated to meet different grade levels and student cohorts. So like their library is so large because of rehashing and tweaking and adjusting to like, you know, are they going to go by grade level? Are they going to go by skill level, topic, things like that. But they branched out later into a couple other things like language arts and science. At one point, they owned what would become Blizzard Entertainment before it spun off, so that's kind of wild. There's a link there. Blizzard of World of Warcraft fame. And then eventually they were acquired by a company called CUC International and was merged with Knowledge Adventure, who continued the Blaster series. They even had a game on the Nintendo DS, 2008's Math Blaster in the Prime Adventure. Ha ha ha.
Jump, 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 start first grade, jump, 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 start first grade, jump, 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 start first grade, jump, jump, jump.
Let's talk about Knowledge Adventure and the JumpStart games. Anybody play any of those? All right. So Knowledge Adventure was founded in 1991, and they initially developed games for DOS, of all things, like JumpStart Kindergarten. Yeah, they were developed by Fanfare Software and then published by Knowledge Adventure, and then they all kind of became one thing. They developed and released, JumpStart series. CUC International bought them and Davidson in '96 and merged them under the name Knowledge Adventure. There were a whole other slew of other acquisitions and mergers. The owner, now called Vivendi, sold Knowledge Adventure to an investment group, which renamed it to JumpStart Games. This was a lot for me to unravel. At one point, they bought Neopets, but then they sold them to Fluffy Dog Studios and spun off to their own thing, which is probably why Neopets still survives and this doesn't. But also Neopets has like a big community behind them. And then eventually they were bought by online game publisher NetDragon Websoft in 2017, but closed their doors in 2023. But you can see here, like, as part of their marketing thing, like, we have everything, like, from, you know, barely using a computer like toddlers all the way up to 5th grade, which at the time I thought it was weird, toddlers using a computer, but now we got kids who, you know, are trying to swipe things instead of flip pages, so the times.
Step into a world of mystery. Explore exotic lands. Discover true adventure with the Clue Finders award-winning software. Join Joni, Santiago, Leslie, Owen, and Laptrap as they come face to face with danger. Deep in the rainforest, in ancient Egyptian pyramids, beneath the sea, in an alien world, underground in an empire of mutant plants, high in the
pretty
chilling
graphic.
Himalayas, in a haunted amusement park. Learn essential academic skills as you help the Clue Finders solve these thrilling mystery adventures. Clue Finders software, now available online or at a retailer near you.
So I heard from a couple of y'all you're familiar with the Clue Finders series. Excellent. That was done by the Learning Company, which was founded in 1980, initially funded by a National Science Foundation grant. By a group including Warren Robinette, who programmed Adventure for the Atari. Because these guys also saw potential for educational video games with the proliferation of the Apple II. That was a big impetus. Let's see, they developed the Reader Rabbit series for younger kids, Clue Finders for older audiences, some of the Super Seekers games like Treasure Mountain, Treasure Math Storm. We have one of those. And then Softkey took it over in a hostile takeover in '95 and adopted the name. It basically like took it over and body snatched it with the name and reduced the team to a skeleton crew, unfortunately, which they continued to develop games, but they eventually sunk with the Softkey after their acquisition by Mattel in 1999. We can save questions for the end. I didn't know where to put this, but I wanted to give a shout out to typing games. There's so many of them out there, because typing classes existed before the personal computer. For example, my mom took a typewriter typing course in high school. I took typing as part of my education in elementary and middle school in the computer lab. I don't even know if it's still taught as a thing because people just know how to type now. But the widespread adoption of personal computers made typing even more relevant and an increasingly desirable skill. Like, this is now an educational thing, kind of like handwriting was at some point. And there was software for kids and adults, some independent IPs and some licensed. So like we have Mario Teaches Typing, but we also have like Slam Dunk Typing, which uses these crunchy CG sprites that I love so much. And then Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing for Kids at the bottom. And then typing games based on platforms besides PCs required keyboard peripherals, like Typing of the Dead, which I love so much. Thank you to my husband for introducing that to me. There's also English of the Dead and Math of the Dead. They turned this into every edutainment game possible. The Dreamcast, it was ported to the Dreamcast and then Windows and PS2. It's an adaptation of House of the Dead. There's also a pinball game, apparently, for this. But Terminal Montage on YouTube has a really lovely, speed run of it. So we're about halfway through, so now's the point where we can go on a journey with our backwards baseball caps and talk about some edutainment games that live rent-free in my heart.
We're on the case and we're chasing her through history. In time, it's Carmen San Diego.
I love the opening cutscene sequence for this.
Let's go. Mine at last, the one and only Acme Chrono Skimmer. Prepare for a wild ride, my friends. This new time travel device will allow us to tunnel back in time and steal history's greatest treasures. I'm going to drop each of you off at a different time and place in history. Your job is to steal an historical object. Each of you will receive a note revealing exactly where to hide until I pick you up. Don't forget, tear up that note so no Acme agents can track you down. Chrono Skimmer activated. History awaits.
Sorry, the recording was a little stuttery there. But what I learned from this is don't write down your evil plans to leave evidence, because that is a key mechanic in Carmen Sandiego's Great Chase Through Time from 1997. This is actually a remake from the game in 1989. It was a 4-disc set. It was hefty. And it had the voice acting talents of Lynn Thigpen, who here is familiar with the movie The Warriors?
All right now, for all you boppers out there in the big city, all you street people with an ear for the action, I've been asked to relay a request from the Gramercy Riffs. It's a special for the Warriors. That's that real live bunch from Coney, and I do mean the Warriors. Here's a hit with them in mind. Don't worry. I'll send along an Acme good guy to help you. This first trip is a long one. You're going all the way back to ancient Egypt, where there's something vile on the Nile. Queen Hatshepsut should have taken the throne by now, but it hasn't happened. Find out why. Here's Antiquity now. She's got your Chronopedia and your Acme time cuffs. Carmen always leaves a note telling her crooks where to hide, so collect any note scraps you may find. And here's the most important thing. Carmen and her creeps have messed up history, so do the world a favor and set things straight.
I love the pun names for everybody, the vile villains as well as all your good guys.
Whoa, time traveling always gives me a head rush. Cool. Hi there, pilot. I'm Antiquity, your trusty Acme good guide. We're in ancient Egypt, circa 1490 BCE. That's over 3,000 years backwards in time. We'd better get investigating. Just tap on that boatman to talk with him, then select a question to ask him.
So yeah, before this panel, I went back and watched a playthrough of this because I think I had only completed the full thing once. I had done like the first half of the game up to a certain point, and then I got stuck on one of the puzzles. But I was a little worried about going back to it, seeing how much it would hold up from the 90s, but honestly, surprisingly well, at least I thought. Some parts age well, some poorly, but it kind of acts as a time capsule in itself, and interesting what they picked to highlight or to include in the game, whether for gameplay purposes or for a comprehensive bit. This really helped give me an appetite for like world history, when at least the curricula that I was in school really focused on US history and their version of it. So it was really nice to see different perspectives. Also, the clothes of all the good guides are 90s-tastic. The drip is real. But we were watching the games, and like there's a mission with Christopher Columbus being lost in time, and we would just remark, good, let him stay lost. Like there's no problem here. And then some US history bits put the founding fathers up on a bit of pedestals. But it's been like 20 years of, learning and unraveling a lot of that. So that was interesting. Also, some voice talents in here, like Charles Martinet, who does Mario, does Beethoven and Shakespeare in this, and you can hear it. It's great. Also, I'm pretty sure Rob Paulson is I've an idea, among other people. And then I didn't realize that it's revealed at the end that Carmen is an ex-Acme agent, but turned to crime because working on Acme cases was too easy and not enough of a challenge for her. But that's why she has that insider knowledge of how to get into everything. She was trained with the best, and then she flipped, which I thought was a really cool piece of intrigue. So yeah, there is a YouTube channel that just does recordings of full playthroughs of all of these games if, like me, you couldn't get it to run on your modern system. So I definitely recommend checking those out. Okay, I didn't realize that part of this was a meme up until now, but if you know, let me know.
You've got to give the kids exactly what they ask for. Ready, set, go.
Please give me 1/4 tray of pudding, 1/4 tray of string beans, 1/2 tray of salad.
This kid's a square.
Thank you.
And an animal.
1/4 tray of string beans. Please give me 1/4 tray of strawberries, 1/4 tray of Jell-O, 1/4 tray of ice cream. Thank you.
True first graders.
Please give me a whole tray of peas. Thank you.
Please give me 1/3 tray of Jell-O, 1/3 tray of asparagus, 1/3 tray of French fries. Thank you.
Wow, great job. You served 4 kids. Let's try again.
Honestly, that looked better than some of the public school lunches that I had, but also I'm pretty sure the developers picked what kids want. Like, why is that ice cream, 1, so photorealistic, and 2, so much bigger than the beans and the peas? Like, that girl just drained them of all the peas in the kitchen. And the YouTube comments on that were pretty good. So now that's a recurring thing for us. Peas, thank you. As she bodies the peas have eliminated world hunger. And somebody said, had to play the Marche Militaire, which is by Franz Schubert and was in the public domain, which is probably why they used it, as well as the feeding the troops joke. But somebody was like, yeah, I had to play that for a recital, and all I could think of was,
Please give me. Thank you.
so yeah, it's funny to see that, and I didn't realize the frickin' tray of peas thing was on TikTok. But yeah, photorealistic food, not using utensils, probably not the healthiest school lunch, but you know what? It was fun and it was stressful. And then the glop monster, even when I'm cooking today, I double check if I'm using a teaspoon or a tablespoon, so that stuck with me. If me and my sisters are baking and, you know, it's not a good bake, it ends up being, oh no, it's the glop monster. So that stuck. And then this was my first creepypasta because, yeah, she's laughing, she knows. So I had left the computer on to like go eat dinner upstairs or something because the family computer was in the basement. But now and then there's like a timed idle animation where Frankie will ask if you're still there. So I was coming down the stairs and the lights were off because I hadn't hit the switch yet. And then I just hear downstairs, are you still there? I booked it upstairs and I was like, ah! I always made sure the lights were on before I descended the stairs in case Frankie could actually see me. We've reconciled since then. I love this one.
The idea for the helicopter was thought up long before it was built. A helicopter is an aircraft that's lifted into the sky by one or two powerful whirling rotors. Why didn't the person who first invented the helicopter build one?
Well, you see, Miss Winkle, it happened like this. The inventor of the helicopter was eating a delicious spaghetti dinner when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone came in and spilled sauce all over his designs. I think it was a rival inventor.
Oh, Polly, you are so right. It was a case of industrial sabotage. Spilled spaghetti sauce kept the first helicopter from being built.
Spaghetti sauce? Preposterous. There must be some other reason why the person who invented the helicopter didn't build one. We better find out. Aviation history depends on us. Click on the inventory button to put away the transquizzer.
Amelia Airbot, the famous flying robot, has disappeared. Send out a search party. And while you're at it, search out these 4 clues. A bee, a pair of sneakers, a car, and a construction crane.
So for a long time, this was my favorite game. I love this thing to death. I also love how that sequence was all the same voice actress talking to herself. And I think part of it was the aesthetics of the style. Like, it does this really cool thing of mixing these pre-rendered CGI backgrounds with these really animated sprites where it feels really cohesive, but also kind of like dark, which was kind of cool and applies to your sci-fi sensibilities. I found the gameplay loop was satisfying. Like, I went through and watched a playthrough of parts of this. Like, you don't have the same clue locations each time, but you also pick which other activities you want to do to get enough points to get through the door to that final quiz show, Pollywood Squares, at the end. Yeah, I like the sci-fi bit. Later releases of the game trimmed down the banter and the dialogue, which I really like that sass. As somebody who also played Animal Crossing on the GameCube, like, I like that salt. But yeah, like lines like, there's no mission clue in here, but Mort looks hungry and you look stupid. I'll bet if you feed him what he wants, he'll give you some of the invention points you need. Or, you know, jokes that were clearly written for the adults who might be sitting with their kid playing this. Like, normally I could go for a 57 Chevy right about now, but Polly's behavior has made me lose my appetite. Like, 9-year-olds don't know what a 57 Chevy is. They put that in for fun. But the sheer amount of script in this and just like a lot of the stuff stuck with me. Again, it's also late 90s, some of the stuff they picked. I think they did a good variety. But yeah, James Naismith, basketball. Yeah, that sticks with you. All right, let's go back to clue finders for a minute. So we had 4th grade, which was the Egyptian one, but the 3rd grade one is the one I think that stuck with me the most. I love the puns in this. Mathra, Mothra, the Numerians, the Sumerians, Dr. Pythagoras, and the pilot is Charles Limburger. But my question with this is, where are Leslie and Owen? Like, half the clue finders are missing. You just go with 2 of them here. The eco-terrorism and conservationist theming are interesting because they were kind of contemporary with Captain Planet and worries about that. So I found that pertinent and still relevant. The landscapes are cool, but why are you sending unsupervised kids here? Like, Pythagoras, like, they should be sending in somebody else, not like his niece and her friend. I also appreciate, just like the world building here. Like, you've got the Goo Lagoon, you've got the Monkey Kingdom, which has like these lava rings of fire. Like, just send kids to the volcano, it's fine. And then the Goo Lagoon was very cool. And then toward the end, you get like these really intricate set piece puzzles of this giant temple, and it's really, really cool. It's also a pretty good challenge. Like, it has a variety of things like math and language arts and problem solving and all kinds of stuff, so it's kind of got it all. Warning that this video does have flashing lights. If you know what it is, you know what it is.
Here in Liverpuddle, we're all in quite a muddle, 'cause since the monster's come back, he's ruining the goo. It used to be we flourished, the goo here kept us nourished. Now our lovely home's impurish, and we miss fresh goo.
Wait for it.
Goo, goo, what happened to you? You smell like old socks from Mathra shoes. Ooh, goo, goo, there's just one thing to do. Find the key, stop the monster, and clean up the goo. The falls of...
All right, hold on, I'm just gonna go back. Like, look at those flowers. I think the short one's my favorite. It's just so goo, yeah. It's like, that's a piece of education in itself, is teaching kids to appreciate the Beatles. And then I wanted to put this one in. I don't know who played this or the Madeline games. I love these so much.
In an old house in Paris that was covered with vines lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. They left the house at 9:30 in 2 straight lines, in rain or shine. The smallest one was Madeline.
Yeah, I really like how they kept with the storybook aesthetic for this. Like, this looks like the illustrated books, especially the backgrounds, but they did a really nice, I thought they did a really nice job of keeping with that theme. And then, like, even little things like when you go from area to area, because they're all flat painted scenes, like Madeline will like get bigger or smaller as she like moves to like, you know, the bridge over here, which is then continuous with the space that continues over here. Like, there's a good awareness of like moving through a storybook space. And then they have like little musical stings that go with that when you're doing it. That was Christopher Plummer, who was narrating that, who you may know as the dad in The Sound of Music. He narrated the animation in the video games. The other interesting thing revisiting this is that it came out before the adoption of the euro in 1999. So they had to exchange currency while traveling in the game. Like, that is a mechanic in the game. Like, you're using Italian lira and Swiss francs, things like that. Turkey still uses the Turkish lira. But yeah, the unique music snippets with transition animations, like you don't just disappear and like snap cut and pop somewhere. This is just a really nice, delightful thing. But I also think it's interesting because it's a problem-solving game, but kind of educational in like a travel sense. But this is a really sweet game, so I wanted to give it a shout out. So real quick, if you want to scan the QR code, these are resources and further reading. These are some of the sources. This is where you can read some cool articles or some behind the scenes, see playthroughs of different games or different repositories. You may be able to get them to work on your computer, stuff like that. Can't recommend enough the Strong Museum, National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. It's the home of the World Video Game Hall of Fame, and it does have online exhibits on their website. There's a good article on where North Dakota is Carmen San Diego that's fascinating. And then an article about Mabel Addis on her work on the Sumerian game. So that is all I have for you this morning. Thank you for being here today. I very much appreciate it. If you would like to see more panels like this in the future, please rate on the app. I can stick around for a little bit, but thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of MAGFest and have a safe trip home.